The American dream. It's synonymous with everything good and the right of every citizen. It's never easy. Success takes hard work, perseverance, stamina, and holding fast to core beliefs. But an out-of-control government has put the dream in jeopardy. 8 out of 10 Americans think it's harder to achieve the dream now than before, and will be even worse for the next generation.
Somebody else made that happen.
Fortunately, a powerful voice has arisen to put we the people back in charge, to revitalize the dream. The modern-day Tea Party movement is stronger than ever. Grassroots are growing deeper. Millions of patriots are organizing locally. New, conservative, principled leaders are emerging. The hope for a better tomorrow is strong because everybody deserves the opportunity to pursue the American dream. Tea Party Patriots, pursue your American dream.
Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator of our next panel, Jason Rowe, partner at Revolvis Consulting.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the panel, Reaching Out, the Rest of the Story. This is something I'm sure we all know and appreciate is going to be very important to the future of the conservative movement and to the Republican Party. I think back to right after the 2008 elections and when conservative leaders like Brent Bozell started pulling other conservative leaders together to talk about what we're going to do to make sure 2008 didn't happen again. And as frustrating as it can be, I think we've many times before gone through this post-election navel-gazing on how we're going to change things and then go right back to doing things the way we did them before. And the way the demographics are changing in the United States, if we don't change, we will not be relevant to the national debate. This panel, I think, is very important and instructive because we've got 4 leaders who have put their money where their mouth is in terms of outreach, and one who's going to demonstrate how this works by becoming the next senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia. I want to share a quick anecdote that I think demonstrates one of the problems that we have, but also the opportunities that we have. My firm, Revolvis, just managed the campaign for Kevin Faulconer, the new mayor of San Diego. San Diego is now the largest city in the United States with a Republican mayor, and it is a city, that's worth it. It's a city with only 26% Republican registration. The special election was on February 11th, and on January 2nd, we opened up an office in a Black and Latino community in the southern part of the city. When we opened that up, we did a campaign kickoff at 10 o'clock in the morning, and about 8:30, I was standing in the office when an older black man walks in and asks me if I'm involved in the campaign. I said yes, and he said, I'm not going to vote for Kevin Faulconer, and I'm probably not going to come to your event later today, but I wanted to come by and let you know how important it is to me and to this community that you opened up your headquarters here. And, you know, we don't see Republicans down here very often. And I hope if he becomes mayor, this won't be the last time that we see him. Now, for me, just that conversation made what we did gratifying because I can see that we can move the needle if we engage. But I was frustrated to hear this is the first time he's seen a Republican down in this neighborhood. If we don't change that, we won't change the position that we have with blacks and Latinos and Asians in this country. We've got to make the investment and the commitment, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today to find out how we can do better what we need to do to survive. So I will start by introducing our august panel, and I figured out when they figured out the panels, how they choose the moderator is who's the least important person, and that is why I get these duties. I will start with Mr. Robert Woodson, the founder and president of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, often referred to as the godfather of the movement to empower neighborhood-based organizations. Mr. Woodson's social activism dates back to the 1960s when, as a young civil rights activist, he developed and coordinated national and local community development programs. During the 1970s, he directed the National Urban League's Administration of Justice Division and later served as a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. For more than 4 decades, he has promoted the principles of self-help and neighborhood empowerment and the importance of institutions of civil society. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Bob Woodson. Elroy Saylor is a co-founder and the CEO of the J.C. Watts Companies. Elroy has led a dynamic and talented executive management team to build an organization from startup to an organization with revenues of $25 million. Prior to founding the J.C. Watts Companies, he served in numerous capacities throughout the government at the federal and state levels and serves on the board as a board member of the Red Branch Technologies. He has served as the Director of Urban Affairs for Michigan Governor John Engler, where he handled urban development matters, and has served as an advisor to former U.S. Senator Spencer Abraham and Congressman J.C. Watts. And on a personal note, I was once a volunteer for Elroy in our home state of Michigan when he was the deputy campaign manager for Governor John Engler. Welcome, Elroy Saylor. Ed Gillespie, you all know, is an Alexandria communications consultant and former White House aide. He spent his career fighting for conservative principles of limited government, effective government, and personal liberty that help make our lives better and more prosperous for Virginians. Ed is a longtime policy and communications aide to former House Majority Leader Dick Armey and was a principal drafter of the Contract with America. Most importantly, after being the chairman of the RNC, he is going to be the next senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Welcome, Ed Gillespie. And while I don't know if he's here yet or not, I'm going to introduce him, and if he shows up, then he can join us. Congressman Steve Pearce, representative from New Mexico, a Vietnam veteran and decorated Air Force pilot. Steve and his wife Cynthia built and operated an oil field service company in Hobbs, New Mexico. Through his business experience, Steve became well acquainted with the overregulation and taxation that plagues small business owners. Today, he's serving his 5th term in Congress, where he works to stand up against federal overreach in the rural West and small businesses that form the backbone of our economy. Congressman Pearce has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, National Journal, and many other publications for his successful efforts to connect with minorities in his district. I will say on a personal note as well, I worked on Congressman Pearce's first race in 2002 and ran the 72-hour program in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is 50% Latino and 2-to-1 Democrat. And Steve actually took 50% of the vote in Las Cruces. He was an amazing campaigner, and I look forward to him joining us as well. So let's preemptively welcome Congressman Pearce. Well, I think what we want to talk about is where we are in the conservative movement in the Republican Party and what we need to do a better job of reaching out to minority voters. But I think one thing that I'd like to start with that is very relevant to this organization is the debate that we sometimes have with the establishment versus the grassroots on if we have to change who we are in order to do better with minority voters. And specifically, does that mean we have to moderate our policies, or do we need to renew our commitment to communicating how our policies will help minority communities? And why don't we start with Senator Gillespie?
Don't jinx me, but look, I believe that we can and must stand up for conservative principles and carry that message with confidence into communities that we as a party have not done a great job of in the past couple of decades. The fact is economic growth, upward mobility, helping people lift themselves out of poverty, quality schools, education reform, these are messages that will resonate and do resonate. I know from my time as chairman of the Republican National Committee when President Bush was able to increase his share of the African American and Hispanic vote, that going and working and carrying our message places that, like I say, we haven't done a good enough job of, will result in increased percentages of the vote everywhere. The fact is we shouldn't write off huge segments of our electorate, and we shouldn't allow the Democrats to take huge segments of the electorate for granted.
The chairman, Mr. Woodson.
I think it's the message is sound. I think it was Gingrich who said that conservatives will never be a popular movement as long as it's perceived to be against the interests of the poor. Having said that, I think what we've got to do is we don't have a ground game. It's like if we were attacking France, we would have a strong Air Force and Navy, but no Army or Marines. We've got to demonstrate to people that we care, not just tell them that we care or say to them they should share our values. We've got to demonstrate that. In the 90s, Dick Riordan, a Republican in California, 2 years before he declared for the mayor's office, went to Jenny Lichtenberg, a nun working in the low-income areas of East LA. And he started volunteering and recruited some of his friends and built a first-class facility for those people. And when he declared for the mayor, he ran at the Riordan Center and was the first Republican to win the mayor's office in 35 years because he understood that he planted charitably so he could harvest politically. We don't do that. We just assume if our policies are correct, if our principles are exact, then people should run to us. But we have got to reach out to them and demonstrate to them that the values that we hold dear have the consequence of creating a better life.
Elroy, you and I have talked a lot about this over the years.
Well, Jason, first of all, let's just, thanks to the CPAC audiences here, man. This is a great event that they do once a year, and I'm just honored and tickled pink that you all would think enough of me to have me come on stage and share some of my views. Yeah, we've been in the movement for a long time. I mean, we go back to the pre-Engler days, running around Detroit and Saginaw and Pontiac, trying to grow the party. And, a few things, Jason. One, it's been pretty clear that we don't, as conservatives, as free market thinkers, as people who love, freedom and liberties, we don't have to abandon our existing friends to make new friends. A lot of people in the party feel that if we go too far in this community or if we talk too much about that, we've allowed the left to somehow define diversity as a bad thing. I would ask the audience, if anybody in the audience had a say in what color you were, raise your hand. I don't see one hand that went up. So, it's a pretty simple rule.
I chose tan. That I had a choice.
I'm a Bible-reading fella, and, if diversity is good enough for God, then by golly, it's got to be good enough for our party. If diversity is good enough for God, it's got to be good enough for our party. And, thank you. Guys like Ed and Bob, they've been in the movement for a long time, and it's in their DNA. They don't show up to the party, to an event, and, have diversity be an afterthought. We need to have a party that looks like America. On Christmas night, if you have children or a loved one, the most important thing on Christmas night, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, the kids are getting ready to wake up. If you're the man or the wife, you're sitting down and you're trying to figure out how to put together that toy. And I'm going to share this little story. So the tool is not the most important thing. It's not the manuscript or the directions. The most important thing on Christmas night to that father or that mother is the picture on the box. Because that's what you look at. You look at the picture on the box to make that dollhouse for your daughter or that go-kart for your son. So the picture that we reflect to America is the most important thing. And to the extent that we can begin to reflect America, not them, but us, I think that's going to work wonders for our party.
Ed, you and I have worked together with Univision, trying to increase the Republican profile, both in the earned media and the paid media, in the Spanish language media. And being in Southern California, obviously I'm very fixated on the Latino vote and what we do to kind of correct ourselves. The College Republican National Committee, after the 2012 elections, did focus groups in cities like San Diego, San Antonio, Orlando, Las Vegas, and I believe Chicago, of Latino, Black, and Asian millennials. And I sat through the San Diego focus groups, and I watched some of the others on DVD. And what I found in it is that there has been a 100% flow of information about who Republicans are from the left. And since we're not present, those millennials are accepting what they've learned from the left about who we are is just, that's the way it is, because there is no counter. In fact, when the moderator Kristen Solstice got up to the board and said, when I say Republican, what words come to mind? The first 3 words were rich, white, and racist. And it occurred to me how much work we have to do, but we're not present, so how are we going to do that? How do we get our candidates, our party leaders, to stop hanging out at the Rotary and the country clubs and start going into the communities, like Mr. Woodson said, to start talking to these people where they live? When are our guys going to realize that has to change?
Well, I do think that is the job of candidates. It starts there, and also elected officials. I do think if you look, our governors tend to do a better job in terms of performing with non-traditional Republican voters and in the minority communities. And partly it's because they're not just there during the campaigns. They stay and they work in the communities and represent all of their constituents. Not everyone, obviously, but as a rule, they tend to perform better than federal candidates. I do think that we have to get our message and be very aggressive in carrying our message into Spanish language media. We have to do it in both paid and earned. There's a misperception that, to be on Univision or Telemundo or any other Spanish language outlets that you have to speak Spanish. That's not the case. You can go on without speaking Spanish, have a translator. I have on my website, edforsenate.com, my introduction video about why I'm running, and with one click you can get a Spanish language version. Eventually have a Korean language version as well, which reflects a little bit of the diversity of Virginia. And so we have to be confident, and we have to be willing to carry those messages, and certainly not cede those audiences to the left. And they fill that vacuum, and we cannot allow that vacuum to occur.
I think the mistake that we make, Dr. King said that the highest form of maturity is the ability to be self-critical. And we really need to understand, I have for the past year taken Congressman Paul Ryan on a quiet listening tour throughout the country. And he's been on his knees in a program in San Antonio praying at the bed of a man coming off of a 20-year heroin addiction, being treated and transformed through God's grace by the thousands in there. And he's seen this firsthand. And so what I say to them, we need to stop patronizing. I said to Paul, the moment I see you getting on a bus from Selma to Montgomery with John Lewis, our relationship is over. We need to stop assuming that we've got to walk through the race door in order to appeal to blacks. I was on a program and I was challenged by David Gergen a couple of weeks ago about, do you really believe that Republicans are friends to the poor? I said, poor people are suffering from their friends in Detroit, where they have been led by liberal black Democrats for 40 years, and it looks like Hiroshima did when it was bombed. Hiroshima looks like Detroit did 60 years ago. So it seems to me that the unmet needs of low-income people in these urban areas are ripe for outreach by the Republican Party and also the conservative movement. But we must go in and partner with leaders in those communities that are demonstrating that they're raising children, they're not dropping out of school or in jail or on drugs. We need to unite with those local indigenous leaders, partner with them, bring some of the people that we are asking to spend $35,000 for a 30-second attack ad, that can hire one community person to transform a drug addict. So we really need to invest in these communities as well as partner with them and help those neighborhoods to build remedies from within the bottom up. When we partner like that, then we're going to win friends.
Bob, I'm from Detroit, and you're absolutely right. I was born and raised in Detroit, and there was a time when I would walk down the street, and you knew every neighbor. Manicured lawns. People were working. My father had no more than a high school degree and stayed with one woman his entire life till he died at 70 years old 3 years ago. My grandfather had 18 kids, stayed with the same woman until he died and went on to glory. But my point there is, one thing I learned from my father and my grandfather and just people in the community and folks like Ed and folks like Bob, guys that I've kind of watched through the movement as I've grown and matriculated through life. I've got 2 kids, 10 and 14-year-olds. I've been very, very blessed. I've got a brother, a sister, and I'm taking care of my mother and my family and friends. And when I go back to Detroit, one of the things I notice is when we talk about free markets, when we talk about freedom, when we talk about liberties, when we talk about family values, when we talk about investing and opportunity and hope, and all the things that we believe in this country, whether you're black, white, red, yellow, or brown, poverty doesn't know the difference. Social inequality doesn't know the difference. It'll hit you wherever you're at. And as Republicans, one of the things I truly believe in the bottom of my heart is, just like I do with my children or my brother and sister, you can't be critical, nor can you give praise or uplift without having a relationship. I can't go to my son, I can't go to my daughter and say, you didn't do a good job at school. I can't go to my brother and say, well, hey, let me help you with that memo, if I don't have a relationship. So one of the first things we've got to do as Republicans, in spite of our great policies, is we've got to develop relationships. I think this movement in America, for us to sustain the greatness, it's got to be about the heart. It's got to be about the soul, and it's got to be about people. Because if we get caught in the minutia, look, when I go back to Detroit and I tell my Aunt Nellie about the omnibus budget reconciliation check, she says, what kind of bus is that? So we can't get caught up in talking, I don't want to say semantics, but policy.
Process.
We've got to, and process, exactly. We've got to talk the language of love and care. And it's not being a wimp or whooshy or liberal or whatever some people want to term it. I mean, it's doing what Jesus Christ asks us to do. Love your neighbor. Honor your mother and father. Help the homeless. Feed the hungry. It's basic principles in life. So it's not easy. The blueprint is there. We've just got to have the will and desire to go after it.
I remember when Steve Goldsmith was the mayor of Indianapolis, and we worked with him for 6 years. Steve had $500 million in money from a bond issue. The first question Steve asked is, how can some of this money help low-income neighborhoods? And so we established a relationship where he went down into those communities and worked with the local business leaders and the community leaders and included them in the economic growth of the city. And Steve Goldsmith was reelected, because as a conservative, he demonstrated. And Elroy's right. People are motivated to change by victories that are possible, not constantly telling them injuries to be avoided. That's why I say to some of our scholars who they act like public policy medical examiners. They keep talking about the failures of the poor. If you're born into a family where you're unemployed and you're having babies before you're 17, you drop out of school. Well, life isn't over. It's a bad situation. But we need to be the movement of redemption. We need to do studies of people who have been redeemed from that bad start. 2 young ladies, for instance, who got accepted with honors into college, studied on their mother's cell phone in a homeless shelter, and one of them graduated valedictorian, the other one salutatorian. They should be prominent in conferences like this, and there are 20 of them around the country. We should invite them to share with us their success, what contributed to their success. What is it what kind of hand up do they need? How many more can we recruit? They should be the symbols of the conservative future.
There have been a couple references here to message, and one of my frustrations with the 2012 elections and how what happened at the top affected so much to what happened at the state and federal level for other candidates is that we ran a national campaign not based on what we offer America or what our vision was, but on how bad Barack Obama is.
Exactly.
And, to me it was instructive that we didn't provide an alternative. Coca-Cola, if they think they're losing market share to Pepsi, doesn't start telling you about how bad Pepsi is.
Exactly.
They tell you how great Coca-Cola is.
Right.
And that's how you increase market share. And it's a frustration when you see, and I referenced the demographics, for the first time in American history, black turnout exceeded white turnout. You look at the demographic growth of Latinos and Hispanics in America and how we are doing in terms of the vote share, only taking 27% in this last presidential. We're kind of in an unsustainable path if we don't correct things. What is it about our national message that is not connecting with the community? What do you tell consultants like me that run candidates? What should we be doing better to help our message resonate with those people?
Well, I'll jump in because we definitely need to provide a positive alternative of what we're for and why our policies work better than the liberals' policies. Elroy's right. The fact is you can't talk process all the time. We talk a lot of process inside our party. We need to talk about benefits and results. So I always point out everything that they do. If you look at this administration's record and the Democrats in the Senate, results in lost jobs, lower take-home pay, higher health care costs, and higher energy prices. That's why people feel this squeeze right now. Our policies result in more jobs being created, higher take-home pay, lower health care costs, and lower energy prices. But we need to lay out those policies, what those policies are, and provide a positive agenda, but also talk about how it benefits people in their everyday lives, as opposed to talking about theory. So I tend to agree with that. We have to be more than just against the president and the Democrats in Congress. We have to be for a positive alternative. And I can tell you, people are hungry for it. Mm-hmm. They want to hear us talking about how our policies help people lift themselves out of poverty, how our policies make sure that the next generation can do better than the generation that came before it. And they want to know, if I vote for you, what are you going to do that will result in those things?
Well, Jesus was the ultimate marketer. When the servants of John the Baptist came to him and said, "Are you the one? Shall we seek another?" He didn't pull out his resume. He responded by healing in their presence and go tell him what you saw. Mm-hmm. So if politicians were to go into communities and meet with people who are helping young ladies who are homeless become successful, and you provide financial support, coaching, assistance to institutions within those communities that are generating these kind of successes. This is an example of demonstrating what your principles. Most of the grassroots leaders that we represent in 39 states, 2,500 of them, share the same conservative values that you do. But they don't discuss those. They don't have conferences to explain them. They just act on those principles and as a consequence improve the quality of life for people. We need to partner with those people in those communities the way Pharaoh and Joseph came together. Rich and poor, they reached across racial, ethnic lines to develop a partnership. That's the kind of relationships that the conservatives need to have with low-income leaders. They are anxious and available, but we need to be available to them by going into their community and finding them. Like a Geiger counter. They're not looking for you. You need to go find them.
I had lunch last week with a black pastor who's working on prisoner reentry. Right. There's an opportunity here, I think, where conservative values and principles, redemption, and coming together with interest of the community, we do absolutely have to be there. And we have to listen, and we have to be open to ideas. And when consistent with, I believe, which is often the case, if not most of the time the case with our conservative principles, act on it. But you're right, we have to be there.
You know, Jason, I had Senator Rand Paul down in Detroit back in January, down at the Detroit Economic Club. And one of the things that I was really excited and impressed with him, much like with Governor John Engler, those are gentlemen, and men in our society, they come around every once in a while. You get a Reagan, and he gives you a vision, and he says, I'm going to place a crown high enough above your head, and I'm going to challenge you to grow tall enough to wear it. You get guys like, Newt Gingrich. You get guys like Jack Kemp. You get your J.C. Watts, and they're not afraid to take a message and inspire people to the highest common denominator versus the lowest common denominator. When we took Senator Rand Paul into Detroit, he spoke before an all-white audience crowd that morning, did a fundraiser. He then went to the Detroit Economic Club, and it was a majority white audience. And then we sat him in front of about 20 to 30 African Americans. 70% of the African Americans in this little roundtable discussion we had were Democrats. Again, they were Democrats. And one thing that was so impressive is where we started. His message was consistent. It did not change. So my point there is, when you go into a non-traditional Republican community, the burden is on us. The burden of leadership is on guys like Ed, who's running for Senate, to say, I'm going to go talk to these pastors. The burden is on Bob Woodson with his foundation to say, hey, I'm going to go into these organizations. Because that 15-year-old girl or that 21-year-old guy who's thinking about getting married and trying to raise a family. The estate tax, when he dies, that's a killer. He hasn't had generational wealth. The marriage tax, when he gets married, we want to encourage marriage. We don't want to discourage marriage. You know, when you start talking about family values and things of that nature like that, those are issues that resonate, but we can't talk about these issues that makes this young lady who had an abortion feel as she was any less than the person who chose life. We've got to encourage life. So we can talk about the social issues, we can talk about the economic issues, we can talk about the hope issues when we go into these communities. But one thing we cannot make the mistake of, we will never out-liberal a liberal. We will never outspend a liberal. That is not our message. You know, as Bob mentioned, the problems of Detroit, Democrats have run that city. John Conyers, has been the congressman, and bless his heart. But he's been the congressman since before I was born, I'm not going to give my age, but since 1962, 63, 64, he's been the congressman. So when you look at these issues and when you look at the greatness of America and when you start looking at the decline of our urban and rural cities, I did a thesis when I was at Morehouse College. And I said over the last 30 to 40 years, the federal government at the president's office was split from Democrats and Republicans, pretty much 48, 50-50. The governors across the country in most of your major urban cities with states that have urban cities have been split across the country. But what has been 90% in the hands of Democrats, and not only Democrats, but what has been 90% from a racial perspective, black Democrats. Most of your major cities have had a black Democrat running that city. The congressman has been black, and he's been a Democrat. The state representatives have been black, they've been a Democrat. The county commissioner has been black, they've been a Democrat. So the leadership in the black community has been black and has been Democrat. So if we're to go and sustain the greatness of America, we've got to engage those communities, because that child who's growing up, if she doesn't hear from us, if she doesn't know us, she doesn't know any difference between poverty and hope and opportunity. If the federal government, if those Democrats are going to continue to provide a pathway to nowhere, and we're going to stand back and just say that those people are wrong, or they're welfare queens, or they don't care, America will never sustain its greatness.
I think Jesus said the poor will always be with us, but he didn't say they're the same people. They change. And the only way, so we've got to think outside of the box too. For one of the things that we're doing with Congressman Ryan, we go back to Indianapolis, that we need that any minority group's participation in the American economy does not depend on what government does. It's their small business formation rate. A healthy community generates about 2.5 businesses per 1,000 people per year. In the black and Hispanic community, the business formation rate is 3 businesses per 100,000 per year. So we are going to create what we call opportunity zones, where we take a young man like in Indianapolis who was sent 13 years in prison, came out, started working washing cars, now has 15 people working for him because he washes your car in your driveway, and he has contracts with car dealerships. But what he needs is access to capital. He needs coaching about how to expand and stabilize that business. And there are 20 other people standing behind him who are ready to be job generators in that high crime neighborhood that need access to capital and also coaching about how to run a successful business. So these are the kind of ideas that will engage people in these communities. But you've got to believe that these communities have capacity, that they're just not cesspools of pathologies, as a lot of our conservative scholars lead you to believe. And so if you believe that people have the will, but all they need is the way to be self-sufficient, then conservatives will step up with remedies, access to capital, but also rather than vilify wealthy people, we should enlist them as partners, as enterprise partners in these communities to help create wealth among those entrepreneurs that are in those communities. Government's not involved in that.
One other thing, Jason, you mentioned in terms of folks that are advising campaigns. If you recall, when we were running Engler's campaign back in Michigan, one of the things I remember vividly sitting down with Dan Perot, who was the campaign manager and the governor's chief of staff, we said, let's redefine victory. And we said to the governor and to the campaign manager, we said, for every $1 we spend in Detroit, I said, we're going to force Howard Wolpe to spend $2. Because if we're in Detroit spending $1 on radio, media, or print, or whatever it may be, the leadership in the black community then goes to the Democratic Party and say, well, hey, and this is what they did. They said Governor John Engler just bought a radio spot. So now Howard Wolpe's had to double down and go back and spend $2 because the leadership was upset. We said, Governor, let's go spend a day down at Flood's, which is a local restaurant there. That evening, when we went down there, if you recall, the campaign for Howard Wolpe called up to Howard Wolpe and said, Governor John Engler's down here in Detroit having lunch with folks. He had to leave an event and turn around and double back to come back to Detroit. So every hour that we spent in Detroit, it forced him to spend 2 in Detroit. So he was, from a tactical point of view, we redefined victory by not so much how many votes we got out of Detroit, and we ended up getting, I think, 24, 26%. We did very, very well. But we said, let's force the candidate to spend more money, let's force him to spend more time, and let's force him to change his message. Because we didn't have to do any of that. And so we redefined victory, and it turned out to be a winning formula for 3 campaigns where we continued to grow in Detroit. We received the endorsement of the largest African-American-owned paper. But again, it was because we redefined victory from a tactical perspective.
Elroy, you bring up a great point, and I think that's one of the things that we experienced in the San Diego mayor's race, is we forced the Democrat to go defend his territory. We could play offense because we were willing to go after his voters. And we did force him to go back and have to retrench, and he ended up running far to the left, taking himself outside of the mainstream to compensate for what we were doing, going after his base. So I think that's very good counsel. It's no secret that as bad as things are for the Republicans with Latinos, they are far worse with the black community. My former business partner when I had a government affairs firm, Elroy, you know Mike McKay, was a black Democrat from Queens, New York, and the most partisan Democrat you've ever met in your life. But if you sat down and you had a conversation with him, he agreed with 80 or 90% of the things that we believe in. When it comes to non-traditional voters, how much of this is policy and how much of it is politics? How much of the troubles that we're having in minority communities have to do with the left demonizing our brand to the point that they're unwilling to listen to what we have to say, where they actually agree with us on this stuff and could see, if you took apart the labels, that we're right and we're a better opportunity? How much of it do you think is that as opposed to the actual policies? Ed?
Well, I think there's always demonization in politics, and I do think we have to get our policies out there. We have to acknowledge the historic nature of President Obama and his impact on the black vote in this country. But he's term limited, he's done, and we have a new opportunity here where he's not going to be at the top of the ticket, obviously, and I think that gives us an opportunity to make some headway. In between 2000 and 2004, we increased our share of the black vote. Now, I'm always quick to say it's kind of pathetic when you're bragging that you went from 9% to 11%, but we were getting the sign right. The direction was moving in the right way, and we can do better. I think we can increase our share of African-American vote in this midterm election. I believe we definitely can, and certainly in the next presidential election, and we've got to.
But you're not going to do it by showing up to recruit people to vote for you. You must demonstrate to them that you deserve their vote. Because I think what the left does is they really invest charitably. You can say what you want about George Soros, the Ford Foundation. President Obama had foundation, liberal funders who committed $350 million to helping in his Black Youth Initiative. Well, that's something I think where there can be common ground. But where are the financial support on the conservative side for these kind of social interventions? Now, so that we've got to take some responsibility for that. But if you show up, I think, because most neighborhood people, low-income people, are non-ideological, they're non-political. They're more concerned, as one young man here years ago when the Klan came with a rickety bus, and so the Washington Post stuck a microphone in the face of a man in 8th Ward 8, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods here. He says, what do you think about the Klan? Are you going to demonstrate against them? He said, bring them down here if they can get rid of these drug addicts. So that's where low-income people place the issue of race. They're more concerned about their safety than they are race. So it seems to me that as conservatives, we can respond to that need by supporting interventions that address those kinds of problems. And then people will listen to you, but you've got to show up. You've got to not just come when you need them, come when they need you.
Well, and I will tell you, you make a very good point. I've realized that when it comes to, major donors in the country, Democrat donors recognize that election cycles are 24 months long.
Exactly.
And Republican donors think they're 6 months long. And so we're getting in the fourth quarter, and we're already down by 2 touchdowns, and we can't understand how we can't make it up and win on Election Day. We do have to make some investments. I think one of the frustrations that I see from our perspective, and I know there are solutions, is that the Democrats using nonprofits and going into these communities have lots of goodies to offer.
Exactly.
And our guys aren't exactly in the offering goodies business. And so it's harder for us to go in and do the same kind of thing. What can we do, and I know you have experience with this, with our nonprofit?
But I think you make, I have to challenge, it's not goodies. It bothers me when people assume that low-income people respond to gifts, food stamps, or things that are given to them. Nobody wants to be dependent. So let's assume that people want a hand up and not a handout. Then we need, but like Dick Riordan demonstrated, he made investments. He built a community center that taught kids English. It was a facility that's used for weddings. It's used for all kinds of things. So he demonstrated his commitment. And so once he did that, when he asked people for their vote, there was a reason that they could give them the vote. People who have been Democrats all their life, Sister Jenny Lichtenberg, who's a non-liberal Democrat, she said, I campaigned for that Republican because he committed resources and help to us, so we supported him. That's just a simple kind of reciprocity, I think, that goes on. But I don't think that what liberals do is at least they express their concern. Whether what they do is helpful or harmful, they show up. If they show up, they win. If we don't show up, we lose. Simple proposition.
I'll give you an example that, I mentioned the prisoner reentry program that I was talking to some people about, and they're not looking for government dollars or money. What they're looking for is to make sure that employers understand that these people coming out of prison have gone through job training, have done faith-based work, are reuniting with their families, are trying to be good family men. This is largely men in this instance. And they would like for business owners and big businesses in the area to know more about this and to know there is a labor pool here. And if we believe in redemption, as we do, then we should be looking at this labor pool for employment and looking for basically for introductions and that kind of thing. And that, I would like to be helpful to them because I think it's a great idea.
When John Kasich in Ohio, when people come out of jail, out of prison, they are not allowed to receive their occupancy license as plumbers, electricians, barbers. Well, a liberal Democrat came together with a conservative city council legislator and co-sponsored legislation to change that. And John Kasich signed it into law. So there are areas of cooperation that means that no one has to compromise their principles, but we must look for those.
And I agree with everything both the gentlemen are saying. I've never met a black, a white, a red, or a yellow, or a brown person who wants to be poor. We need more taxpayers in America. We don't need more taxes. Our messages will resonate in these urban areas. If I go to, Birmingham, which is one of the most affluent cities in Michigan, population maybe 90% white, 2-3% black. And if I flip the script and then go to Detroit, one of the poorest cities that's in bankruptcy in our country, population 80% black, maybe, 3-6% white, the rest other, those men and women want the same thing.
That's right.
They want better schools. They want a safe neighborhood. They want to have more of their taxes at home. When I was growing up in Detroit, I used to always hear my dad complain about this FICA fella. I thought FICA was a criminal. I mean, he was always complaining, you know, FICA, 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 FICA. And he used to say, son, you know, you need to, when you grow older, he says, I want you signing the front of a check, not the back of a check. You know, so you need the guy that's going to bale the hay, but you also want to have the guy that's carrying the hay at the same time. But if we take our message into these urban areas, friends, I honestly believe from the bottom of my heart, if we start talking about allowing people to keep more of their money, don't send it to Washington. When I go back home to Detroit, it's amazing that my friends and my families, they think that Washington's money is Washington's money. Somehow the liberal establishment has allowed all people to think that Washington has its own pocket of money. We've forgotten that that's our money, folks. When Senator Rand Paul, in front of an all-Democrat audience, he says, look, I don't want to give some giveaways. I don't want to have goodies. He says, we don't need a big empowerment plan. He says, I want to do freedom zones. He says, you know why I want to do freedom zones? I don't want your money coming to Washington to have 535 bureaucrats figure out who to give it out to, and it becomes, giveaways based off of patronage and who can hire the best lobbyists and who can has the best friends. But if cities and municipalities and individuals send less money to Washington, that's more money in their pocket. And I don't care if you're poor, if you're rich, you're black, you're white, red, yellow, or brown. Everybody wants more money and resources in their pocket. So again, if we would just go into these communities and tell our message, as Ed is doing on his campaign, as Bob's been doing his whole life, we have an opportunity to compete, because Democrats, they play hardball. I've had friends who, they lose contracts when they start talking about supporting a Republican. I've had friends, you get called an Uncle Tom, Michael Steele got Oreos thrown at him when he went to Howard University. So it's a vicious cycle. I mean, and unfortunately, and I have to say this respectfully, but I honestly believe that the establishment in the Democratic Party has a stake in the condition of people in the minority community. Because if that condition changed, there might not be as big a need for the Democrat policies as we think. And I think everyone understands what I'm saying without... I'm trying to be respectful here to get to my point. But
I don't think there's any Democrats here.
But, you know, can you imagine if, as we're talking about the importance of entrepreneurship, if suddenly the conservative movement, the Republicans are saying we are interested in really helping people in those communities to create wealth, to generate jobs by reaching out to the entrepreneurs in those communities. It's interesting that A.D. Gaston, people vilifying rich people, one of the most popular shows, and it was on television, is Life of the Rich and Famous, and most poor people watch that. Because you got to identify with where people want to be, not where they are. Mm-hmm. And A.D. Gaston, as you remember, was Alabama's first black millionaire. And he said, and he had a 6th grade education, he said, it's better to say I is rich than I am poor. Because most successful entrepreneurs are not scholarly people. They're not A students. A students come back to universities and teach. C students come back and endow. Because, see that man saying, am I right? See? Because if you're real smart, you got to get all the answers before you move, and by the time you move, it's too late. But see, C students are able to act on the 30% of the knowledge that they already have. And they're also not afraid to make a mistake and fail. Then they'll come back and do it another way. There's that same spirit of entrepreneurship in these low-income communities. And so I think what we've got to do as conservatives is start an initiative to say, forget government for a while. We want to get together some of these people that are putting billions into these political campaigns, take a portion of that and set up a capital pool so we can promote enterprise in these low-income neighborhoods and see what happens.
You know, and Bob is absolutely right. You know, we can't be afraid to fight on these issues. Look, I grew up in Detroit. My father had a gun in every drawer. There was no safety checks. There was no waiting period. There was no big brother. My father said, look, son, when I'm out at work, working the night shift, he worked triple overtime at Ford's. He says, if somebody breaks into the house, I'm a 13, 12-year-old kid. Your job is to defend your family. It's pretty simple. The criminals don't go through safety checks. The criminals don't have to wait 24 hours. They go in the back of in the neighborhoods and get their guns. So why in the heck would the federal government want to make it more difficult for Papa Sailor to defend his family? You know, we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these issues. I never knew what the NRA was, but I've been a friend of guns in inner city Detroit my whole life. Let's not be afraid to talk about gun rights. The life issue, 30%. Look, abortion has been worse on the African-American community than the slave trade, than Jim Crow ever. 30% of the African-American community, we make up 30% of the abortions in the country. That's going out of the world backwards, my friend. You start talking about the life issue, the NRA issues. You talk about Social Security, privatization, and giving people more money. Well, look, as a black man, Ed, unfortunately, the statistics say that I'm probably going to die before you, man. And that's not fair. So why do I want the federal government keeping my money and investing it and then giving it back to me when I'm not even going to be here? Let me keep more of my resources now and invest it in my family. You know, we start talking about charter schools and education. Look, I was born to a dad who had no more than a high school degree. He owned not a cleaners, he owned a convenience store, and he had a social club, and we had some rental properties. Fortunately enough, my dad had enough resources when I got into the 10th grade to put me in a private school. But out of 17 brothers and sisters, there were only 2 of us that could go to private school. Everybody else who lived in Detroit, they were forced to go to a school in their district. Charter schools and vouchers are a good thing. If it hasn't destroyed the college educational system, how in the heck is it going to destroy the public school education system? So these issues, we can't be afraid to fight on them. We need to be bold, just like Ed is doing in his campaign. We need to be aggressive, and we need to speak with conviction. You know, we can't allow the left to out-left us, and we should never try to outspend them.
Well, this is my hook. Before I wrap it up, if we could just get any final thoughts, and Ed, why don't we start with you?
Well, look, I do think that we have huge opportunities here to make gains with younger voters and segments of the electorate that we have not, as a party, done a good job of reaching out to. And I am looking forward to, in Virginia, practicing what I've been preaching for 30 years now. So I think it's a very important topic of discussion for conservatives to have.
Well, we live in this place called America, which is the greatest country on the face of the planet. We're fortunate and blessed to call it home. Whether you're black, white, red, yellow, brown, we call this place home. And Republicans need to treat everyone as if we're brothers and sisters, because this is our home. We shouldn't have Democrats, we shouldn't have Republicans, we shouldn't say black, white. Look, that's your brother. This is our home. This is the greatest country on the face of the planet. So if we engage folks in what we believe in, debate is healthy. Let's not be afraid. Let's go into these communities and let's engage and embrace our brothers and sisters in urban America.
I'd just like to quote somebody 2,000 years ago. Aristotle said that these are the qualities of leadership. One is competence. Do they think we're doing what's right? Integrity. Are we trustworthy? And the third is goodwill. Do they really care about people like me? And we must demonstrate that we care about people by reaching out to them and coming to them at times to meet their needs. And when we do that, then they'll be able to respond in kind to our needs. Thank you.
Well, there will be a lot of important conversations over the next couple days, but I personally think that there are a few probably that are as important as this one in terms of how we remain a relevant force in American politics and improving people's lives. I'd like to ask the audience, first, thank you for taking interest in this, and I'd like to thank our panel for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.